Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining on St. Paddy's Day. My name is Janine West. I'm the Grower Technical Analyst for Landscape Ontario and the Project Manager for our LOLA project funded by OMAFRA. We are recording today's webinar and it will be available for public viewing on our website and on the LO YouTube channel. Just for technical, if you have any issues hearing us or seeing the screen, please send us a chat. There's a little pop-up bar at the bottom with, if you hover over it with your mouse, that'll show up and you can chat with us that way. Let us know if you're having any technical issues or if you have any questions. They can go there or in the Q&A option that's at the bottom. Otherwise, all the attendees are muted, just so that you know. But if there's questions later on, we want this to be a very interactive type discussion today, so we can allow unmute you, so to speak, later on once we get through some of the initial questions. And we do need a bit of a break from pre-recorded presentations and PowerPoints. So we decided to do a bit more informal today, an interview kind of approach with Rick and Elizabeth Peters from Peters Co. Peters Co. is a lean consulting company. They have a little bit of a different approach, which I really think that the growers need to hear and have an opportunity to explore your approach to lean management. And so what we're going to do is just a series of questions, and I'd invite all of you that are listening in to send questions in the chat, and where we can, we'll fit them in as we go through today's interview. So welcome to Elizabeth and to Rick. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Nice
for
to be
having
here.
us.
So maybe just start off and tell us how you got into this business, I think, of lean consulting.
Thank you. Mid-2000s, I was actually an investment advisor prior to that, and began to become very interested in seeing the turnaround that was happening with something called lean. What is this lean stuff? And long story short, it turned out upon a little bit of research on my part that lean is kind of the Americanized name for what we know today as the Toyota production system. And we began, I began as an investment advisor to see that companies that were beginning to dominate their industry, even if they were starting from literally a turnaround situation on the verge of bankruptcy like Aerostructures was, and what a huge turnaround where they end up dominating their business space. Elizabeth at that time was working at the OAN, Oregon Association of Nurseries. And so as we began to learn more and more about the Toyota production system, our background is actually from the aerospace industry, where we were introduced to it. But Elizabeth is actually, I would credit her with bringing lean to the Oregon Association of Nurseries, particularly in Oregon, in a big way. And I'll let her talk a little bit about that.
Oh, well, so I was working at the Oregon Association of Nurseries. I was the editor of the Digger magazine at the time. And our members had talked about their customers wanted their product just in time. And so I knew that was a lean term. So that's where I, through connections that Rick had the opportunity to learn from the aerospace industry, learn the tools and understanding and the principles and the philosophy of it, and how to make lean stick and not just be, one-up projects here and there. And so it was in that time with the Oregon Association of Nurseries, we started the lean team. We called it the lean team. It was a consortium of companies that came together to learn how do we apply these manufacturing principles to a nursery, which is a totally, well, it's manufacturing, but it's living product, which is very different than ball bearings, right? I mean, it's a very different product. So the principles apply. It was just a lot of fun back then to learn, okay, how do we apply this to nurseries?
Consequently, I left the investment business to do things that I thought were a whole lot more rewarding personally. I'm not talking about financially. I'm talking about being able to go out and work with organizations, and over time you see a tremendous transformation that occurs if they're willing to do the work that it takes. Nothing comes easy.
Yeah.
But the Toyota production system, as the world knows it today, has actually been around for over 70 years. So there's nothing new about it. There have been a lot of tangents that have taken off from that and have gone in different directions today.
Yeah.
But I would say that we're more of the fundamentalists. We believe very strongly in, as we know it today, to teach and practice the principles of the Toyota production system, because it simply works. It's not our system. We can't lay claim to any of that fame, but it can have a tremendously dramatic, not just upon productivity and other things we all like to hear about. That's what got us into it initially. But we learned, as you can kind of see from the chart up above and behind Elizabeth, we learn about changing the overall culture of an organization. It can't happen without it, because it's one thing to make positive changes to your processes. It's another thing to take your people along for that ride, and that's required. And another thing is leadership. Leadership has to drive it, or it's simply not going to happen. We've seen that happen so many times, but that's another question down the road.
It is, yeah. So maybe I'll just ask if there's particular, maybe how does a nursery start? We'll maybe navigate into those kinds of questions. What are the things that they should do if they're curious about lean, if they're thinking about it? What's the next? And then what's the next step after that? So how do they prepare? How do they realize if this might work for them? And then maybe give an idea of what then we can get into some of the process involved and how they get going.
Great question.
The first place to start is education, understanding what the 7 wastes are, the basic principles of lean. What is standard work? What is flow versus batching versus flow. So some type of education would be the place to start. And really, we recommend starting with leadership, so that the top person in the company needs to stay a few steps ahead of his or her team. And then go work through the organization from there. So start with the top leaders of the organization, and then do training at the staff level. But any company can become educated on lean. There's so many resources out there.
Too many.
You had asked for, are there some books or some resources that we could recommend? And we brought some. We have them here. So this book, we don't get any commission from this, but this is a really good first book for any leader or a staff member in a company. It's called Lean Turnaround by Art Byrne. And then he wrote another book that this is more of like, here's the basic principles and
why we do lean,
why we do it. And then he has another book called the Lean Turnaround Action Guide. And this is really great for, he puts together the scenario of a company and how he would go in with his team to transform a company. So these are excellent first books for
teaches you how to do it. This one, especially the last book that he wrote, he also made the comment, he hopes it's the last book he'll ever write. It's quite an undertaking, but he's been the CEO of a number of top flight organizations out there over his career. When he retired, no better term for that, he actually formed an investment group that they go out and, rather like the corporate raiders of yesteryear that I'm very familiar with, they go out and actually buy out companies that are highly undervalued and pay over what the market will say they're worth, because they value them from a lean perspective and what they're capable of. And so Art and his investment team would oftentimes pay a premium for these organizations, turn them around and make them very, very capable, competitive organizations. And that's what he continues to do to this day. He's one of the few that I really enjoy reading about because he's done it. He doesn't just talk about it. He doesn't just teach it in a school someplace or whatever, which is good. It's all helpful. The principles can be learned anywhere, but there's nothing like learning it from people that have actually done it. They know where the pitfalls are, where you're going to run into problems with personnel, et cetera. Nobody likes change, and Lean is all about change.
Yeah.
So what do you do when you first start with a farm? How's
Well, I was just going to say, so education is the first part.
Yeah.
And it's really important for everybody in the company to have that basic understanding. What are the 7 wastes? What's value to your customer? Because Lean is all about eliminating waste. That's really, it's that simple. And eliminating waste. You can use all these other tools, but eliminating waste is at the core. And so we start with education, the staff and the leadership, and then we start to go in and tear apart processes. So we walk alongside a company to teach them how to eliminate waste. And that's really, it requires bias for action. So a bias for let's just do it. Let's not just talk about it, but we have this process. We see this waste. Let's go make the change. And there's a specific, there's standard work for changing processes. And that's what we teach.
As well.
Is we teach and coach how to make those changes.
There's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And if there's a wrong way to do it, I probably have discovered that at some point along the way. So it doesn't matter whether we're right or not. It matters whether the people that you're working with accept and adopt what you're wanting them to do. So gaining trust is an important thing.
Yeah.
If they're willing to try, you've got it made, because Lean will sell itself. And there are, as Elizabeth was mentioning, there are a lot of different tools depending upon what kind of a process you're trying to work with. It could be a huge thing like a shipping process, but there are many sub processes or operations within processes that need that direct hands-on change as well. And you're working with individual people always. So some tools are better suited for dealing with certain kinds of things, but that's what we teach people in time. As a matter of fact, I guess now would be a good time to mention this. We're often asked, well, if you guys are so good, what's the big deal about you? Well, first of all, it's not us. We believe in the Toyota production system because if we're doing our job right, people are understanding it and they're making the change themselves. So this is important. What distinguishes us from many consultants out there, and I'm not taking away from what they do, but what distinguishes us is following in the footsteps as best as we understand it from the Toyota production system. Part of our obligation is to transfer what we know to the entities that we're working with. And so that means we just don't come in and blitz a process and, hey, great, hey, we did great. And everybody happy now? Everybody happy? And then we're out of here, and so much for that. But instead, we come in, work alongside your teams, managers, leaders, right down to the operational level. We work side by side with individuals so that the victory is theirs, not ours. And that's what Toyota has always intended for it to be. We're just following the principles. The better we can do that, the better teachers and coaches we can be. We claim nothing in and of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You're sharing that. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, it is very much about changing the organization and how you look at your work and how you feel about your participation with the company. I mean, it's very much about changing the culture of an organization.
That's great. Just to follow up on that, that's great.
Please.
So Toyota has been trying to teach us this for over 70 years. And every now and then, there's a few more that understand it. But basically, they make this assumption that nobody goes to work each and every day trying to screw up as best they can. Or another way of saying it, They believe that people show up to go to work each and every day trying to do the best work that they can with the resources they've been given. That's what they believe, and that's how they treat their people, with respect. And so the idea of blame is out the window from day one. They don't even want to hear if, well, that's this person's fault or that person's fault. I'm not interested in fault. We have a process issue that we need to fix. There's a challenge with this. How can we get our minds together and solve this? And that's what the Toyota production system is about. And James Womack, who's probably credited most with bringing lean or importing lean from Japan to the United States, and many of your viewers certainly know that, MIT graduate that essentially has spent all of his career traveling back and forth to Japan, trying to understand just what the heck it is that the Japanese are dominating American industry. You know, take a look at your TV. Well, I like Sanyo, or I like Samsung, or I like Sony. Well, they're all built in Japan, you know?
Japanese companies.
Right. And so the idea is we lost that. We pretty much lost the electronics industry. And if we're not careful, the same thing can happen in other marketplaces as well. Mm-hmm. Now, we're catching on here in the States. But what James Womack, in his own words, were to this effect. You know, I've been traveling back and forth between here and Japan for decades. And for the first couple of decades, we got it wrong. And that we thought just bringing back tools, and you can see part of the culture model on the right-hand side, the green circle. I know you can't read all the writing, but that's the operating approach, or the continuous improvement things. In other words, let's go apply this tool and fix this process, and isn't everything great? And that would work for a while, but inevitably things would keep falling back to where they were before, because we didn't have the other two parts of the circle that are required in order to establish a healthy culture. And that is at the top, which is your value system. And the other circle would be, how do you treat your people, or your people philosophy? And I'll leave it at that. I don't want to just ramble on here, but this has been a big, big learning curve for all of us here in the States, and certainly Europe as well, that it isn't just about fixing a process and getting more productivity or this or that. It's about how we grow our people, how we grow our organization to work together. The biggest thing that I can say is, when we go out to a farm, greenhouse, whatever the case may be, work with a company, time and time again, we find highly skilled men and women that know how to do their work.
Yeah.
We're not about telling them to do their work differently. What we are telling them, oftentimes for the first time, is we ask people if they're willing to work together as a team. That changes everything.
Sounds like a really, it's an intensive process. I think I've heard similar concepts and approaches in the sense that it's about the people from some of the other people we've interviewed and spoken with. So when you come on farm, there's a training portion, then you're looking at some processes. Are you looking at the whole farm, or do you start with a certain activity? Like, how do you decide when you start working with the farm after you've gone through the education phase?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So typically we like to start with workplace organization. And there's a bunch of reasons why. We want to help everyone in the company start to adopt the mindset that lean is good, lean is okay. I'm not going to get fired as a result of lean. And so we like to start with 5S, and people can look up 5S. We have a training course in our learning center on 5S. But 5S, it's just a way of organizing your workspace to make it safe, clean, and a nice place to work, and more productive. So 5S is a huge productivity builder for most people. You know, a lot of farms, they have places that are, you know, this farm is handed down from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. And so there's a bunch of space that typically is filled with old things, you know, handed down, broken things. Nobody ever thought, well, we better get rid of this, you know. And farms tend to be a little dirtier, you know, a little messier, right, than a manufacturing plant typically. And so, so 5S is a great place to start because it makes you more productive right off the bat. And it helps people to adopt a little better to change. It's hard to clean out my drawer that's been messy for 10 years, you know, but it helps me to think differently about how I do my work and my approach. So we start with workplace organization. Then we'll work, you know, during that process, we'll work with leadership to identify what are the best targets that have the most waste, that are the highest profile. So lots of people are impacted. Places that get a lot of complaints. So when people complain a lot, they're more, it's easier to adapt to change when it's something that we don't like, right? And so we'll go through, we'll talk to leadership groups, and we'll help them select the plan of attack for process improvement.
And is
Yeah.
it something, have you noticed over time, one of the comments that I get, you know, should I automate? Is that one of the solutions as we start getting into these activities and thinking about, sorry, I'm losing my hand if I move too fast. It's always good. You just go really quick. What are the things that, you know, what I need to do once I start picking apart a process? Do I need to put in conveyors? Do I need to buy some automated, you know, we have a lot of discussions about automated potting machines, automated weeders. I mean, we're doing this project to try to understand what tools are out there. So this is a way of thinking that we're talking about, or a way of managing a process. Are there tools like conveyors and automation that complement it? Is it an expensive proposition? You know, how does equipment fit in?
You take that.
Well,
one.
starting from the basic premise that Toyota has been teaching all of us, again, is creativity before capital. So we learn to use this before we pull out the wallet and start shucking the dollars out. Now, there's nothing at all wrong with automation, but you want to always look at it from a waste perspective, because oftentimes, let's say that we have two process areas, right, or operational areas, and they're separated 20 feet apart. And in the first case, an individual goes and picks up a plant or a tree and carries it over from point A to point B. And then they turn right around and go do the same thing. So they set up a cycle for themselves again and again and again. Now, they say, well, gosh, we can save a lot if we put in a conveyor belt or a conveyor system. And now one person can just load stuff on one end of the conveyor, and that product now travels down the length of 20 feet of that conveyor. Now person B now has to take that object or plant or tree off of the conveyor belt and do whatever they're going to do with it. So probably now you've got a second person involved. So rather, there's nothing wrong with spending money, but we call that automating waste. And just removing the human factor for the sake of trying to save something that way doesn't get rid of the waste. It would be far better to move your operational steps as close together as possible, whenever possible. So perhaps we don't need a conveyor system at all. That's something that Lean would be gently nudging us all to look at first. Do I need to go to this expense? Or is there another way to handle this outside of forking out the dollars? There has been a number of instances where we have asked the owner to stall a purchase, six-figure purchases on equipment, said, look, we're not against this, but we have an alternative that perhaps we should consider. And was just a much, based upon sort of the principle I was just mentioning, it got them through the exact same thing for about 1/12 the cost. And they were able to do the work 2 to 3 times faster. And so you tell me which is a better investment.
Right.
And they sell themselves on it. All we're there for is to just coach and try to make suggestions along the way. Is there a better way rather than pulling out the dollars? Now, please don't misunderstand me. We are not against automation. Automation is great, sometimes necessary. In our state, the costs of everything are going up, including labor. I'm sure it's like that across the United States and Canada probably. And the one thing that we can control, that Lean teaches us that we can control, is our cost of operations. And if there's a way to justify that and it makes sense, then certainly automation can work. But we've seen, and we would recommend that that's the last thing you should do, not the very first thing that you should do.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was very gracious.
Well, I think there's a lot of questions that come out about equipment.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's why I wanted to bring that one up.
Good one.
And is this, I guess the other piece of that is, are there, maybe another side to the question is, are there farms or situations or processes that it's easier to implement Lean than others? Like, do you find it's easier to implement Lean on a potting line or where you have a container production system versus a system where it's trees, or it's much more manual labor, and it's pretty hard to replicate that and make changes when you're working on 3,000 acres versus, you know, everything in one spot?
Great question. I can say this wasn't 3,000 acres, but we worked with companies with a couple of thousand acres. We typically work with organizations with 200 or 300 acres. We can, on one of our case studies, as a matter of fact, as part of our online course, we have a nursery in our neck of the woods. They grow trees. Robinson Nursery, they have a really good reputation, sell across the United States. I'm not sure about Canada, but
I'm sure they get a can.
in terms of distance means transportation, right? You've got to move product from part A to part B. That is always a big issue and something that has to be looked at carefully. I can say this though, whenever you're able to move those operational steps to the process area or to the material that you're working on, rather than bringing all the material into a centralized area and then sending it through various kinds of things, it generally works out a whole lot better. And case in point, where it used to take the people on the crew, they used to have 11-person crew that was grading and tagging these trees. And they would net the root systems, et cetera. They used to do what they'd been taught, and that was to bring these trees in on a big trailer system and then deposit all these trees in a central area where they'd go through the various processing. And then from there, they would get transported again out to the loading dock or ready to be loaded, kind of in the staging area. What we showed them was nothing miraculous, but it was a game changer for them, because their crew that normally would take 1 hour and 57 minutes to do X number of these trees, now they were able to get it down to 57 to 58 minutes, and their crew size dropped from 11 to 5. So, and they were getting the same output. So from 11 to 5 in crew size, they reduced their time to do it in half. So everybody out there is capable of doing productivity in units per worker hour. So they had a massive, massive gain simply because all this product wasn't waiting to be processed someplace. Mm-hmm. That's where the big hit is at. And in this case, they took the process to the product and processed it right there. And then when they were done, brought it all back. And the really fun thing on that particular day was a game changer for everyone, particularly the employees, was when the first crew finished, the second crew, also 11 people, they were still doing it the old way. So it took them a full nearly 2 hours to do it. So the first crew was waiting all this time for them to come back. And when they had the report out, we just shut up and listened to them talk, and pretty much all Spanish only speaking people. But you'd see people in tears. They'd never before worked as a team. And you know that it's right when the crews themselves like the work better than they've ever liked it before. And I'll leave it at that. So automation is great. Whether they're traveling on 2,000 acres or 200 or 300 acres or 20 acres or whatever, the principles are exactly the same.
Yeah.
You may have to adapt them a bit. Transportation will always be an issue.
Yeah.
What these guys did with one piece flow, and they were the first nursery in our region to be able to accomplish that, to our knowledge, at least in part in one of their processes, made a huge difference to them, and particularly the crews doing the work. It just made their day. So you never know until you measure it. And part of what we do is when we start working with an organization, you have to pull out the stopwatch and start timing virtually every aspect of what's going on out there. You have to track. You need a baseline to operate from, because any tries or changes that you're making, you need to quantify it. You can't just say, well, it felt better, so it must be better, right? Yeah.
Has to be quantified. How
Right,
long
yeah.
we've got a couple of questions in the
Sure.
Q&A, and I think some of them fit quite
Sure.
well now, because from your experience, this process from education and building that culture, how long does that typically take? And then the next part of that is, from that point, how long does it take to start see payback?
Yeah. So, well, to change a culture in an organization takes at least 2 years. And it's 2 years if you're really working on it. You have it defined. Leadership is completely on board with it. And you're driving your culture. So it takes at least 2 years to change a culture. And what was the other part of the question?
And after, how quickly do you start seeing payback and return on investment? Because obviously there's a cost, which I'd like to ask later as well, but how long until you start seeing dollar changes in terms of your productivity or your labor efficiencies?
Oh yeah, productivity changes. I mean, it improves very quickly. We've seen it improve. Like, we did a 5S project, which is workplace organizations, the first step, with a landscape company up in Seattle, Washington, and their productivity improved like what, 400% just by getting things organized.
Yeah, that's not us. It was broken. Their system was broken. So what turned out to be initially as a 5S exercise in organizing their yard space and how they loaded plants onto trees or onto trucks, very confined space. It's literally downtown Seattle, and they would buy plant materials from local nurseries, and it was tough for them. They were successful and had difficulty keeping up with that success. So it's not all as bleak as you might sound, but after we came in, we came in as a consortium, as a team, and worked with this group for a day, I guess, and organized their area. And there's a lot you can do with 20 people,
right,
all pitching in to make change happen. It was a lot of fun. We were all really tired at the end of the day, but they established the flow that they needed to be able to pull the plant material and get it right the first time and load it on the trucks. And so they were absolutely thrilled with that. And again, we're just following the principles. We give all the credit to the people doing the work. And
so that was a one-day event.
That happened to be in one day, but now it required some preparatory work. So we had been working with this company more than once. They'd been through 5S before, but they said, okay, we'd really like to do this. This is big. And so we prepped. They were, the hosting company was ready to receive 4 or 5 other organizations that descended upon their premises to help them make the improvements. And many hands make light work, and the crews did a great job. They knew what they needed to do.
Right. And they recognize the issue and they had prepared for it. So that's
Yeah.
useful.
Absolutely.
It
Okay,
does
I'll
require-
get back to some other pieces of that. There's a question just because you're talking about 5S now and how that worked. And I think maybe just if you could recap, Elizabeth, quickly, just what the 5S stands for.
Sure, yeah, the 5S's, and we've got a post here someplace. It's sort, set in order, shine, and I can put it in the chat while Rick's talking here. Sort, set in order, shine, standardize, and sustain. So it's those are the 5S's. They stand for Japanese words. So we kind of adapted them to English, and we just recently adapted them to Spanish. Now we've got a Spanish course for this. And so sort means you get rid of unneeded items from an area. Set in order means you put them in order and apply visual controls. So you have a place for everything and everything in its place. Then shine is literally just clean the area, clean it up. Standardize means to set standards for how we're going to keep it clean, whether they're daily or weekly. So, and we post them, we make it very visible, and we set up some type of check system so that every week we're checking this area and somebody's signing off, hey, this is good now, or we have this work to do. And that's sustain. So sustaining is just keeping it up every week.
Thank you for that, just because we were using it as an example and I wanted to make sure everybody was understanding.
Down in the truck.
So is there any estimation of cost you can give us of what farms might be looking at? I don't know if it's based on farm size or complexity. Like how does this even, how do you quote a job?
Oh my gosh. Well, every company, every organization is different. So it's not, there's no like off the shelf plan for how to go about doing lean in an organization, because every company is different. So, I mean, anybody could, take a course or read the book and start to implement these changes on their own. So it's possible to do that. Where you start, and you have to think about the allocation of people's time as well. So, how much are you willing to spend to save people's time or to improve productivity? Because it takes time for people to make changes in an organization.
Well, we can quantify that a bit. Our Lean Foundations course in English, which was available and is available from the beginning of this year, that basically takes this book and puts it in a 4-hour online lecture series, including continuous flow. And that's a really fun simulation. We've done it for real life out at Robinson Nursery. So the owners of the nursery themselves participated in the simulation. But that class cost is $397 a person.
Yeah, it's
now,
like an online course.
Right. And that'll be true whether it's English or the Spanish version. Now, as companies have more individuals to go through the course, that cost de-escalates very quickly. So we're happy to discuss group costs or company or corporate rates. The pandemic has been a mixed blessing. Didn't help our business any, but it certainly gave us time to prepare what we had been preparing ahead of time. And that was, gosh, we need to get some of the stuff online. There are a lot of really smaller nurseries that are in, Oklahoma, well, no, let's face it, Florida.
Canada?
So we have organizations that we are working with that are multinational companies that are not that large. Some are quite large, but they're from coast to coast now. And that's only because we've been able to, courtesy of the pandemic, we've been able to invest in some studio equipment and promote online real-time training, just much like this is, only this would be one-on-one, or a group, 16 people or so would be sitting in a Zoom session just like this, and we would be interchanging back and forth. what I'm referring to is the actual online self-paced course. And we had been planning to do that for a couple of years, but the pandemic, said, well, we
Time
might
to
as
do
well
it.
do it. Yeah, it definitely afforded us the time to begin to just simply do it. So all this last year, we've been working on this. We have the first course is 19, 20 some odd videos. And we're just completing, as Elizabeth mentioned, I mean, tomorrow it's going to go live, the Spanish version, which is exactly the same thing as an English version, at least of the Lean Foundation. So we have class materials far beyond that. People need to understand the basics. And if you're wanting to understand the basics, there's no better way than to pick up these books and or just get online and take 4 hours worth of online course material, whether it's ours or somebody else's. But we think the Toyota production system is what you should learn. That's what's been around for a long time. As I mentioned, there are lots of deviations from that today, sometimes too much information. We like to try to steer people as best we can. And it's materials that we don't write. We don't create it. All we did is create online content and teach from that. There are a lot of great books that have already been written.
So you're making it more accessible, but,
Yes.
and you also do one-on-one consulting, I'm sure,
Absolutely.
and obviously you've been working with some and just so our listeners know, we've got Elizabeth and Rick are doing a on-farm video recording and interview process with JPLN. Is it JLPN?
JLPN.
JLPN, I had it backwards.
John Lewis is doing it. Yeah.
John Lewis, yes. And then we also have Dave Van Bell from Van Bell Nursery in BC. So we have a couple of case studies where it shows that really on-farm direct as opposed to that remote learning kind of concept. So it's good that there's a range of options available for farms to access, especially right now. It's not easy to jump into having somebody new come on farm. I guess one of the other questions that are in the chat here, have you had farms start and fail, give it up, walk away from it? What is the biggest frustration? What causes that to happen? Are there predictors?
We've seen farms just choose not to over time, or they'll start with one GM and then a new GM comes on board and they drop it. They have no intention of wanting to go in that direction. Maybe they've never had any exposure to it in a serious way before. You have to just roll with it. The consortium is a little bit different here. So to give you an idea and our audience an idea, yes, we do have a consortium. That's a group of companies that re-up every year. Some companies in the consortium have been with us from the beginning, 8-10 years or so. And you pay a flat fee to become part of that. And then what's really great about it is you get to participate in the ongoing change processes at other nurseries. So rather than always having to plan and host your own improvement events, you can keep sending new people all the time to other facilities to watch how they go through the improvement process. It's a great way for your crews to learn other than paying them anyway. They're not taking vacation time to go do that. So you're paying them to become a better employee to learn about process improvement. So we've found that's a great way for organizations, at least in our area, to interface, and they become closer business partners as well.
But back to the question. The question was, do we know of farms or agriculture companies who started this process and then abandoned it?
Yeah.
Yes, we have. And you started to allude to that, Rick. It's totally based on leadership. So if leaders are not committed to it, it's not going to happen. So it does require the leader of the company to drive it, to be the key champion, to stay ahead of the team, and to continually educate him or herself or themselves. They have to drive the lean in an organization, or it will fail.
I mentioned the consortium because the odds of doing much better and staying with it are better when you have mutual accountability, company to company. That's been very helpful to the organizations. Now, our business mix normally is about 80% of the business we do is one-on-one with a company. About 20% of what we do is with a consortium group. They're both a lot of fun, and it's just wonderful. I would like to leave our folks with something though regarding this culture thing. This is something we learned a long time ago, and I would like to just state this now. Your culture, and this is going to be leadership here, your culture is defined by the worst behavior that leadership is willing to tolerate. Your culture will be defined by the worst behavior leadership is willing to tolerate.
So you set the bar.
You set the bar.
That's right.
John Maxwell calls it the law of the lid. Your company will only go as far as you.
The leader's capable.
And if you can't go
one
farther,
step over.
it's not going to happen.
There's another question that's kind of the opposite. What's your biggest success story? Something that you saw that was a challenge, didn't turn out the way you thought, turned out wildly better, or just absolute success story that really stands out?
Might have to look at our website for that.
Well, there's actually been a number of them that have been because of the teams wanting to do it. And what I mean by the teams is we're there, we're facilitating, but it's them doing the work, being the ones to be motivated to go make the change. So we've worked with a number of companies. Do you have one there? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we probably can't name the companies.
Right. They're a local organization
really,
down
really
here.
cool.
They've not been part of a consortium or whatever, but they're a large nursery. And they grow all kinds of, conifers and trees and all kinds of
large,
things.
meaning 300 people.
Oh yeah.
That's large. That's large up here or in Oregon.
Well, in our area, with a number of employees, I have a couple, 2-3 different sites where they actually grow things as well. They've been struggling with shipping, but primarily they build these racks from scratch, and a lot of your group knows exactly what I'm talking about. These easy racks and that type. So they break them down, they bring them in. They have to build them from the ground up. And it used to be they'd have a large crew. They're always working long hours into the night during the busy season as it's ramping up now all through May. And it's just one of those things they had to gut it out and put up with it. They typically load 30 plus 53 footers trucks a day. So it's a pretty good size outfit. And for the nursery business in our neck of the woods. And it was just a massive drain on resources. And you can tell by how their productivity numbers would fall, because every season they would need to hire seasonal help, whether it's contract labor or whatever. And nobody's against that per se, but one of the most common requests we get is, we don't want to get rid of our crew. We love our crew, but how can we reduce our need for seasonal help? Well, we were brought in to help with that. And without getting too much into the details, because it is a tactical strategic move that they made, but it used to be that each crew member that was building racks, they had 10, 12 of them at least, all building a rack on their own. All they did is learn how to work together as a team in one piece flow, and their productivity 130, 140, something like.
It was a huge.
It was huge, and once they got it down, they said, well, okay, well that's great, but what happens when the contract laborers come in? Well, they develop standard work, which in our opinion is the key to lasting and sustaining gains. So the purpose of standard work isn't just so that it worked at the same spot all the time. Well, I already know what the work is. Why do I need to write it down? Well, it's because it isn't always you that's at this workstation, you know? And so, yeah, you understand this. And so when they ran their simulation, this was before their busy season happened, and their timing was really good. They wanted this process to be worked on. They used their best team to put all this stuff together. And by going through this one piece flow process, they were building racks far faster than they ever had before. And they said, well, it's all going to fall apart when the contract help comes in. Well, because all this was well documented and laid out visually very well, each workstation had its own job description.
Standard work.
And standard work, exactly. So it took maybe 20 minutes or so for the people to get a handle on what their part of this process was. Each one of these men, brand new, I mean, they're contract labor, so they work hard, but in very short time, they were working ahead of the A team. And so they were cranking the stuff out really, really quickly. And the real win was they had all this overtime that they had to spend late into the night. We got a call from the owner of this nursery. This was in the middle of the summer.
During the pandemic.
Right in the middle of the pandemic, we were both kind of feeling blues, sorry for ourselves, businesses.
Missing our clients.
You guys are doing great. Nurseries, greenhouses doing great. We were kind of slow, and we got a call from the owner and said, Rick, just wanted you to know we can't thank you enough for what's happened here. And he went on to tell me that they, of all of the nights that they used to work overtime, they only had one time where they had to turn on the lights. In other words, after 7 o'clock, where they actually put in any overtime. It was an especially busy day, well over 30 trucks. And that was just because it was hard for them to see in the dark on the loading docks outside. So they won huge, and it's to their credit. It's our job just to show them the way, but they're the ones that have to do the work. And I would say it's not easy, because the work has to be done by the people, and it has to be driven by leadership. That's the caveat in all of this. So we're just there as guides and coaches. They did great. They did really well. That was an example.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you get to talk now?
We're getting close to the end. We're getting close to 5 o'clock. I've actually allowed everyone on the call to speak if they like. You can come off of mute just by clicking the mute button on your bottom toggle bar there. And I just, while we're waiting to see if anybody else has any questions, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. You've invested a fair bit to communicate what you do with us today, but also by prepping the case study at JLPN. So we're really excited to have that in the next couple of weeks. We'll be able to put that online as well. So we've got a number of lean management webinars now. We'll have a total of 3 that they'll be posted up on LO's website and on the YouTube channel. And we've also got a couple of other material handling and in advances in inventory management and technologies as well. So keep your eyes out for that. And we'll have our new lolanursery.com website up very shortly, as we're just about finished our LOLA project phase 1. We hope there's going to be a phase 2, and we get more engaged with lean management in the next project, which will be a year or 2 project, we hope. So anybody want to chat, feel free to come off of mute and ask. I've got I don't know, John and Christoph are off mute, and I've got a question in the box. Yes, and absolutely, we do have a recording being done of this presentation, so you can share it with other staff as you like. We'll have it posted in the next couple of days. And I know it's getting to the end of the day, and I really appreciate with this spring weather, we are everybody's just going nuts here. So
We appreciate the opportunity to be here. Our goal was simply to help inform, we were asked to simply let you folks know a little bit about us. In turn, we'd like to understand a little bit more about you folks and what your concerns are. We're here to serve, and if we have no business come from it, that's okay. If we can direct you down the right path, we're more than happy to do that.
that's great. I think you have a really special approach that is really distinctive, and I'm sure everybody's going to check out your website. Maybe I can just type, there's two websites, right? It's www.petersco.net.
It's petersco.net.
And then the training one is different, right?
It's learn.petersco.net.
Yeah, that's hosted up on Vimeo or Vimeo, however you choose to pronounce it, by those hosting or those learning management software systems. So that's a LearnDash system, I believe, that our web developer has helped us to deploy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, contact us. We love to answer questions. So if you are stuck or you need some help or just need a definition or two, we're happy to talk to anybody.
Okay.
So what's happening lately, we're, in addition to just the foundations courses, we're rapidly developing the one-off type of courses that we've been asked about so frequently, everything from flow, but how do I prepare for an event? Making change, documenting reality, what forms. So we always supply all of the material that you folks will need to run a successful event, and especially for the follow-up work that's necessary to make sure you don't lose the gains that you work so hard to capture. So those are some sticking points we don't have time to get into today.
Okay. Great. Well, we're just about at 5, so we better wrap it up unless anybody in the audience wants to jump in.
Recognize a couple of names up there.
Yeah,
it's
it was
nice
fun.
to see you folks, or at least know that you're there.
Yeah.
That's great. Yep. And some of the research team for LOLA's on as well. So
Great.
we're all learning and realizing how exciting an opportunity this is, because automation, there's no one size fits all. That's how this project started. And we realized that that's not going to be the answer. So we have to look elsewhere. So that's where this got a lot more prominence, this topic, than we expected when we started.
You were very kind. You didn't ask me the greatest obstacle or greatest challenge we've had. And I will answer that right now. The greatest challenge for me is Rick Peters, overcoming Rick Peters, and my own attitudes and stick in the mud type attitudes. I don't like change any more than anybody else. And so I have to grow right along with the people that we're working with. So every group that we're with, I always learn something.
Yes.
Learn something from.
We do.
So in case any of you were wondering, I'm hoping that comes across. If I can blow it, I'll probably figure out a way to do that at some point. So,
but it sounds like you have the capacity to learn from it and to understand the sticking points that it sounds like the number one thing is people and culture and leadership, and you're able to understand that and work with that. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have an absolutely awesome evening and enjoy your St. Patrick's Day. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for your time, everyone. I appreciate that. All the best.
Take care. Have a great year.
Take care.